I think the answer to that is that, as I was saying earlier, I grew up in this little town out in the country in the Mississippi Delta. I didn't actually know it was out in the country when I was growing up there, but looking back on it, I realized we were pretty country-fried people. But I grew up in this little town in Mississippi in the 1960s and 70s, and at a time when a lot of things were happening in Mississippi in terms of black people and white people. A lot of things happened in our immediate area, not necessarily the most famous things, but some really important things happened. In fact, I'm writing a book and working on a documentary film now that are about all of that. But for whatever reason, in that period of time, when schools were being desegregated finally, that didn't really happen. Real, meaningful desegregation of schools all over the South, and to some degree even in the North, didn't really begin to happen on a substantial scale until about 1970. I know for some of you that sounds like ancient Rome, but it's not actually all that long ago. So my class graduated from high school in 1982, and that was the first class in many places in Mississippi, but the class in 1982 was the first in Mississippi in which black kids and white kids had begun the first day of first grade together and gone all the way through 12th grade. That was the first class. So that was my class. And the schools that I went to were overwhelmingly African American, about 75%, I think, African American. And that was because most of the white folks took off when the schools were integrated. Because the town was about 50-50 black and white. The county was a little bit blacker than white. I think that part of Mississippi is even more black than white, particularly then. But so it was this world in which there were a lot of black people around, a lot more than the white folks here from this neck of the woods would have been accustomed to. But most white families took off when the schools were segregated. And so then I grew up in this world in which a lot of stuff was going on, most of which I didn't understand at the time, most of which I didn't even quite realize at the time. I just knew that something was happening. I was very aware that it seemed to me that all the black kids were mad at all the white kids at all times. That was an observation I made early on. And so all the white kids seemed to be kind of mad back at all the black kids because of that. And by mad, I just mean that there was an edge a lot of the time, in my experience. Oddly enough, there also was an edge between the white kids who went to the public schools and the larger group of white kids who took off and went to these new private schools that were set up to try to preserve segregation. Even though those were many of my best friends, because school was a place where black kids and white kids came together, but no other part, for the most part, no other part of life was mingled in any way. And so my Boy Scout troop was still all white, baseball in summer was all white, the pools that I went to were all white. Almost all the other dimensions of my life were still essentially segregated, not by law, but de facto segregated. And so that was all confusing to me. I didn't know exactly what was going on or why, but it was confusing to me, even at a very early age. And for whatever reason, not everybody does this, but for whatever reason, I became a little preoccupied with that. And preoccupied with, I don't want to make myself sound more remarkable than I was, and I really wasn't, but it did occur to me at a pretty early point that I didn't understand why it seemed to be that there were so many more obstacles in the paths of black people that I knew than in my path or in the paths of white people. And I came from a pretty ordinary middle-class white family of that era. My mother was a school teacher, my father worked for the Forest Service at a government facility there, an agri station nearby there. We were a pretty normal family, but it was evident to me early on that I had prospects for a pretty stable, pretty comfortable life that a whole lot of the black people I encountered clearly did not have very good prospects for. And I didn't understand it. And so I started asking a lot of questions, even when I was a kid, about that. Some of those questions were unwelcome at a time when the adults thought that it would be better to not talk about some of these things right now. And nonetheless, I started asking a lot of questions about those things. And then as I got older, I started writing about things related to that. And I became a journalist. And I wrote about a whole lot of other things, including sports and politics and all kinds of stuff. But along the way, I was always also interested in some of these questions. And my questions got bigger and began to be about more than just the town where I had lived, or the state where I'd grown up. And I found my way to a life of writing about these things.